It's hard to describe the book because the change that it really has on your worldview is so tremendous. It just changes your worldview, right? And I can talk about certain ideas, but they'll be better understood when people go through the entire book and the process of enjoying that. So a big one was optimism, right? That all evil is due to a lack of knowledge and all problems are soluble. There's going to keep being problems, and there's probably an infinite amount of problems in the world, and people are going to solve it. People can solve it, right?
Hello there, wonderful humans. I'm Serge Hunt, and this is the City as a School Young Champions podcast. The following is a conversation with Arjun Khemani. The lockdown was this crazy time where we all had to rethink whether or not teens should be spending all their precious time in high school. For Arjun, the pandemic became an opportunity to connect with people that he normally wouldn't. His neighbour became a lockdown friend. Their conversations during lockdown, which would last for 3 or more hours, exposed him to new ideas like entrepreneurship, critical rationalism, and even the parenting philosophy of taking children seriously. These conversations with inspiring friends and people that he met online via Twitter allowed him to start a blog, podcast, co-authoring a book, and begin writing as a copywriter at a marketing agency. We talk about questioning the conventions around you, including your parents' idea of success, as well as the importance of relationships in learning. As always, show your love for our young champions by liking this video and sharing it with your friends on social media. So, I know there's a bunch of awesome projects that you're working on right now, like book and podcast, and we'll get into it in a minute, but to give people some context for who you are and what you're working on, what's your 60-second pitch?
Okay, that'll be hard. So it started in lockdown, right? Before lockdown, I was mostly a normal kid doing teenage stuff and going to school, caring about grades. But then when lockdown hit, all of a sudden, I wasn't exposed to the same groups of people I would have been had I gone to school, right? And that's when I started delving into these counterculture ideas, started reading books. And after reading, the next natural step was writing for me. So I started a blog. After a while, really influential book during that time was The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch. That inspired me to start a podcast with people related to the community there. I am not caring much about school right now, even though I am in school. So practically, don't really care about it. But because of the other things that I'm doing on the side, it gives me more confidence in not taking school seriously.
Before you were taking school a bit seriously, we both have Indian parents and there's some ideas of what success looks like, right, at school. So you were in this traditional school environment, and maybe let's just touch on that briefly. What were the kind of expectations of success in your family?
Definitely. So in India, success means, to most conventional parents at least, becoming either a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, right? So to do that, you do good at school, you get into a good university and get some degrees and then do the profession. And I was pretty stressing out on this because my dad was telling me, you're in 8th grade now and you want to figure out what you want to do in life and what you want to do when you grow up. And I'm like, yeah, I got to figure it out. It's a pretty important thing. And that's when I started stressing a bit and thinking and telling my friends about it who were also taking mostly a conventional path, going to college and stuff. And that's when, like, during the lockdown part again, I met one friend who was really influential to me. And after a while, I was talking to all these friends, but then after a while during lockdown, it would be just me and him talking for like 2, 3 hours a day. Even though it was lockdown, we were in the same building, we could meet and stuff. And he introduced me to entrepreneurship. And that completely blew my mind because I always thought you had to get a job and do certain things to be successful. But when you look at the richest and most successful people in the world, according to conventional metrics, again, they are not doctors, not lawyers, not engineers. They are entrepreneurs and they have businesses and they invest in assets. So that was the real game changer. That friend really sparked the fire. But then obviously my ideas evolved a lot after that. So he essentially just lit the spark And afterwards, it just blew down the whole forest. Yeah.
That the whole sort of part between feeling the stress of, "Oh, I have to figure out what I'm gonna do," and then finding this friend who you like lockdown was the kind of, what is it, the initial stimulus for this. But what went through your mind? Like, I'm sure a bunch of other teens are thinking, "Oh, I've got to figure out what I want to do next, or like what I'm going to do after school, or like what I should be going to university for." What else crossed your mind as like routes to discover that outside of school?
So they were mostly questions, right? Because I was into this mindset before there was a straight path to success, right? There was just one path and you had to tread on it to do this and be successful. I don't like that word right now, but I'm using it because it's just easier. That's when I started questioning. I'm like, that's not the path that I'd even like to take. I don't want to be an engineer really. Um, and even entrepreneurship, I think the thing that really sparked an interest was that you're solving problems. It's not that you have a business and it's cool, but it's most like more like you're solving problems, and that's interesting. So there, and then I started reading a lot of books. And quick story, I think with reading, I actually picked up the first book just for the sake of it. I was g- I was like, okay, I'm gonna finish this book no matter what. Just I didn't even want to tell people about it, but it was like just for myself. I want to finish a book. And so that's how I started reading, pretty much not really liking the process maybe, but the ends would justify the means because you're finished with a 300-page book, and that means a lot to me. That meant a lot to me. And that's when I started reading. First few books included Think and Grow Rich, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And yeah, after that, after the first 5, 6 books, I just fell in love with reading, right? I was loving what I was learning actually. And it took a complete turn. Now I'm not reading for the number of pages or the number of books, but I'm just actually reading to enjoy the process, to learn, and to apply it to my own life. So reading books was really, yeah, total game changer again. That definitely helped in the evolution of those ideas I was talking about. And yeah, it was a huge process, right? Lockdown, again, I had so much time to think about things and just questions revolving around in my head. Do I even want to do this? What do I want to do? So I mentioned writing, the natural step. It was more like I watched Hamilton, the American musical featuring Lin-Manuel Miranda. I don't know if you've heard of it or seen it. Yeah, cool. So I really love that. And he was big on writing, right? Alexander Hamilton was huge in writing. And that was mainly what inspired me to get into writing. Mainly, perhaps it was a bit of reading as well, because reading and writing go hand in hand. But after that, I was just like, okay, I'm going to start writing. A few online creators really inspired me to start a blog. And yeah, that's how I got going.
I find that wild that like the thing that gave you that love for learning was actually a bunch of books which weren't given in school. And like when is the moment that you get to find ideas or questions that you can fall in love with like you did, and just like you said, it was hard at first, but then you let it snowball and so you read more and more books. And you're getting into writing, and I want to touch on writing in a bit. But we also have this book that we both really love called The Beginning of Infinity. Maybe spend 5 minutes here. Like, what's a big idea from Beginning of Infinity? Who is it written by? Why is it so inspirational to you?
The book, Beginning of Infinity, is written by David Deutsch. And I'm really grateful to have read it and actually spoken to him a few times. And yeah, it's hard to describe the book because the change that it really has on your worldview is so tremendous. It just changes your worldview, right? And I can talk about certain ideas, but they'll be better understood when people go through the entire book and the process of enjoying that. So a big one was optimism, right? That all evil is due to a lack of knowledge and all problems are soluble. There's gonna keep being problems, and there's probably an infinite amount of problems in the world, and people are gonna solve it. People can solve it, right? So it's really no good betting on the world going to end tomorrow, because even if you bet on the world, you won't make any money because we'll be dead, right? So better go do something and make the world a better place. Yeah, that optimism aspect was really amazing. And it really touches on foundational aspects of epistemology. So thinking about knowledge, thinking about thinking, and really oh, love the ideas as well. Shattered a lot of myths in my head, talks about objective beauty, objective morality, and whatnot. So yeah, it was a complete game changer.
Yep. Also highly recommend that book. It was definitely world view shifting for me as well.
Yeah, and also because we also overlap on the education aspect, taking Sharon seriously is a philosophy that was inspired or worked together with the book, Beginning of Infinity, the ideas in the book, The Beginning of Infinity. So it's basically about the best philosophy we have right now that really explains why schools suck, really suck. I think there's many explanations to go about why they're not the best way to go about learning, but this one really gets it very well. We could get into that afterwards, I feel like.
Definitely. I'll put the link in the description as well. Taking children seriously. Yeah. Hugely influential. Like now you've shared it with me. I've been diving into it and I'd love to dig into it more. Cool. So barking that projects, you mentioned book, you mentioned podcasts, you mentioned all sorts of other things. What are you up to right now? Now that you've had this light bulb moment from COVID, spent some time with friends, exploring cool ideas. You said writing came naturally after reading. Like, where's that taking you and what are you working on right now?
So yeah, there's a lot of things, but there's my blog, which is the first thing I actually really started on the internet. And recently, 7 or 8 months ago, I launched a podcast. And those things I really want to help scale and just spread it out to as many people as I can. And I also obviously enjoy the process of writing and doing podcasts. Yeah, that's one. And I have a weekly newsletter that goes hand in hand with the blog. And yeah, I'm also working on a book, which yeah, it's very early stages right now. We're seeking alternative funding, which is fun to write about as well. And for the fun of it again, I'm working at a marketing agency startup. So I'm doing copywriting work there, which is really fun. We have a team mostly very young, all in their 20s, I think. And the founder of that marketing agency, again, we met on Twitter, same as we did. And Twitter definitely, yeah, Twitter was a game changer as well. Growing on Twitter is also one of those projects, perhaps. And yeah, so the copywriting stuff is also helping me a lot. Copywriting is mainly selling through words. So that's really allowing me to see it from the reader's standpoint, buyer's standpoint, and getting me good at sales. And yeah, I really enjoy that. Really appreciate the team from all across the world. Very creative. And yeah, it's just awesome to be able to meet so many people through the power of the internet nowadays.
What are you finding that writing's bringing you? It's clearly a big part of you're able to project ideas. But I think something that's like less talked about on the importance of writing is the ability for you to think clearer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that? Like, how is it improving your ability to think better thoughts instead of just sell through words? I think that's how most people think of it, right? Is like, how do I sell through words? Or how do I convince you of an idea? But there's also the very personal part of writing. Like, how do you relate to the personal part of writing?
Sure. So I recently read an essay by Paul Graham called The Need to Read. And in it, he mentions that writing is not just a way to convey ideas, it's also a way to have them. And that the second part is, of course, really important. He talked about thinking clear, writing, just making it all explicit on paper, no matter what you're doing it for. I like to write even if it's not for an audience. So I'll open up my journal in the morning and just give it a brain dump sometimes. And yeah, it's awesome the ideas that can flow out of your mind through the process of writing. When you're like not perhaps writing, you can tend to revolve in circles in your mind, having the same thought again and again. But when you put it down on paper or on your screen, perhaps you've put it there explicitly, and obviously you won't keep writing it 10 times, 12 times. So even though you're having the thought again and again, if you put it down, it will probably settle more.
No, yeah, I definitely agree. I think the Paul Graham article I'm also linked to, it's really another game changer. You found all the great resources on the internet. Well done. And then you found also great people on the internet. And that's something that another book that we relate on is Ivan Illich's work. I think it was like Deschooling Society is the
Right.
big one, where he talks about learning webs and like the importance of relationships. And you're building all these relationships through Twitter and you've got like a job through Twitter. You're like writing content for the web now. How important are relationships to you in your life now that you know what you know? And for people who are still in school, what would you recommend? Is it just going on Twitter to find these learning relationships? How do they think about finding learning relationships outside of just school?
Sure. Yeah. So relationships are definitely a big thing. And when you're in school or just at home in your neighborhood, you're again exposed to the same groups of people. And sometimes that can be awesome. People can be open minded and you can have amazing conversations with them, get to learn a lot. But people have got to realize that we're no longer geographically bound to the people in our area. There's like a world open, right? And look at the internet as a dark place when it comes to meeting people. It just be careful on the internet and stuff. But I think if you're in the right places, just go and talk to people. I think that could be awesome. That's how I began. I I was writing all these blog posts. So when I started the blog, I forgot to mention, I think I made myself a commitment that I'd write one blog a day for the first 100 days of launching my blog. So 100 blog posts in 100 days. No matter how bad it happens, I'm just gonna hit publish by the end of the day. And I did that, but then not a lot of people read it, right? Nobody knew about it. And then, okay, how am I gonna get an audience to read this? The the thought that came to mind was go individually to people, start a Twitter account, actually go to places where people read instead of still keep publishing on my blog, but go to places and write where people actually read. So Twitter and there's Medium, Quora, if you like, but I really stuck with Twitter and go there after some tweets, some blog posts, talk to people, DM them, just cold DM them. Like cold DM is such an amazing thing, right? I like to say that make your cold DMs warm. So it's just like you're talking to that person, right? Instead of making it sound very cold and bland. But when you can make that happen and when you can genuinely be curious and listen, the world is just expanding with all these people. And I found so many people who are so open-minded and unconventional in their paths on the internet. I'd never find them in school, right? Probably I find a couple or just people I can count on one hand, but with the internet, it's just so many people and there's these communities. You can create communities after a while of building all these relationships. And again, it all comes back to that Illich idea of learning webs, which I think I asked you if you use that, if you were inspired by that to create City as a School, and you said you were, it's really awesome, right? Having these learning networks where people who need the resources are given them, and people who want to share their knowledge are able to share to the people willing to learn and wanting to learn, and just having these thoughts connected. And right now, we don't have a very good net system for that, but if you are willing to put in time and the effort and connect these dots yourself, I think that can be really great. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Like this relationships at the center, I think, of everything that I do at City as a School. And the quote that comes up a lot is you're a product of the five people that you spend the most time with. Giving folks like you the chance to have intention around who you're surrounding yourself with, I think is super important because it crafts who you're going to be and like what opportunities present themselves. And but I know there's a lot of fear for a lot of parents who will go, "Oh no, don't go in that Discord server. What is Discord anyway?" And then if it sort of spirals, and I understand that that's very valid. Yes, the internet's changing everything in education, and it's surprising that it hasn't revolutionized everything. I think these things take a lot longer than normal, but I want to come to the one more point before we wrap up, which is the taking children seriously. Can you speak a little bit about that? Was inspired by some of the thoughts in the beginning of Infinity. Where do you see it having impact? Like, where is it being deployed as a philosophy, or is it really just that article?
So yeah, it's like a whole practical philosophy, right? The whole worldview that the beginning of infinity is giving you is really practical, even though it's philosophical, it's actually practical. So some philosophies tend to be not so practical, but this one is. And with taking children seriously, I think it's aiming more at parents, right? And it is a non-paternalistic view of children. So not needing the parents to coerce their child to do certain things. As parents, they naturally tend to have expectations and intentions from their child. And that's where the main problem I think lies. So parents and children can have different motivations, different desires. But when parents have conflicting intentions set for them and they try to coerce them to do certain things that the child perhaps doesn't want to do, or is just obliged, or then just feels obliged to do, then that creates a lot of issues. And that's not very healthy. So taking children seriously advocates non coercive parenting. So again, there's a completely opposite side to that. And you'd say, okay, so what? Should I just not tell my child to do anything? Should I let him do whatever he wants? And they'll cite some examples of spoiled children as such, but then that's really not taking children seriously as well. That's just letting them do whatever. The idea is not to coerce, not just let them do whatever they want in terms of perhaps if they want to watch a lot of YouTube. That's a minor example, but if they want, just let them do that. But again, having screen time restrictions is a lot of implications. And with this practical philosophy, I think a lot of what if questions emerge. What if my child wants to run on the road without catching my hand? She doesn't want to hold my hand. So what do you do then? Do you coerce them? Do you hold their hand tight? But there's different answers. And I'd really recommend checking out the Taking Children Seriously website, which you could link down. But I think it was really impactful to me, and it also explained why, again, why school really isn't it, because it's the opposite, right? It's just coercing children to do certain things. And again, the ideas in Beginning of Infinity hit that people are fallible, right? Your teachers, they don't know everything. They can be wrong. And even though they have certain knowledge, if you look at it from a broader perspective, you can see that it's just textbook knowledge that they're having. And even that can be wrong. People are fallible. Our knowledge, our explanations can change. And again, that's why we need to be able to criticize ideas. And criticism is actually a good thing, unless you're criticizing people. So criticism is good. When you criticize people, there's a lot of problems. But when you're criticizing the ideas people hold, making a distinction between that, I think that's very important. But school doesn't even allow for that, right? You can't touch the pillars in school. Like you can't really criticize that. Yeah, it's pretty criticism inhibiting habitat, if you like. But
Mm.
yeah, people are fallible. Your teacher can go wrong. That's again so many implications there.
Arjun, I think there's a bunch of really cool final messages that we could potentially touch on. It's this one, like criticism and fallibilism, that people are fallible and that criticism actually generates better ideas in the end. And taking children seriously, which, if I was it, is like really staying present to non-coercive behavior or like non-coercive ways of being with your children. What would you like to touch on as like your message to the audience and maybe some of the other teens who are listening to this?
Because as we touched on, people are fallible. I don't really like giving formative advice, but I'd suggest just question everything, question authority, question this piece of advice itself, and yeah, criticize ideas, not people. Yeah, that's question everything. Stay curious.
Amazing. Cool. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. And yeah, it was a pleasure to have you here. Hopefully we can do it again.
Sure. Thanks for having me.